Hello, this is Franco Cabral broadcasting from the Honest Liar podcast, a conversation around finding the inner liar within all of us and leveraging the truth to create expansion across all areas of your life. Today's topic is Fight for Liberty. Yesterday, I was on a coaching session with my pod in the program that I'm a part of called Forge Legend. I've mentioned before that I invest in myself in becoming a better man, and this is the current program that I'm in that I highly recommend. If you're looking for something to level up your life as a man, it's forgelegend.com. If you're a woman, they have a female version of the program called awakenathena.com. But the purpose of today's podcast is centered around a quote that I heard from a very famous speech by Charlie Chaplin during the time of World War II. And he was addressing the troops and basically the tyranny that was happening at that time with Hitler and all the different things that were going on. And yesterday in the coaching session, we listened to this about 4-minute speech. You can look it up on YouTube, Charlie Chaplin. I think it's called The Greatest Speech Ever or something like that, at least is what it comes up with in YouTube. And we were tasked with identifying the quote that stood out to us the most, or the parable. There were so many powerful insights from this speech, but the one that stood out to me the most was, "Don't fight slavery, fight for liberty." And when we were done listening to it, we had to reflect on what that meant to us. And as I was thinking about this, I started to think, how many times did I or do I enslave myself in my life? And I choose to fight not for what I want, but ultimately what I think I need, because I create some scarcity or lack mentality in my mind. And then I started running through all the many places that this exists. One of them being this podcast. You might recognize, if you're an avid listener of this podcast, that the last time I launched a podcast was about 2 weeks ago. For about 28 weeks, I had a very steady cadence of every single week posting a podcast on Mondays. And last Monday, I didn't post. I had a lot of excuses at the end of the day as to why I didn't. Life has been busy, but I started allowing the excuses almost to go into a second week where I didn't post this week. And I was starting to feel this, like, I don't want to do this podcast. Do I even want to do this anymore? And I started to lose sight of why I was doing this, and I started to be a slave to this podcast. And I realized that it was because I forgot why I even do this podcast. It was interesting because I've been doing this podcast for now over 6 months, 28 episodes. This is episode 29. How is it that after 29 reps of doing something for 29 weeks, I could forget why I do this? And then I started to think about what other areas in my life has this shown up for me. And it's not to say that now I haven't rethought as to why it is that I do this podcast. When I was focused on the slavery of this podcast and basically the fact that I need to do this podcast, I have to do it by Monday. The audience is expecting me to, have it there. I created all these different stories in my head that made it start having the opposite effect of why I wanted to create this podcast in the first place. When I started this podcast, it was because I was afraid of it and because I was looking for a place to generate power in my life. And also a very big driver was the fact that I wanted to have something for my kids to listen to when they grew up. And this is part of my legend that I'm leaving behind for my kids. And hopefully they get the opportunity to listen to this while I'm still alive and I live many more years. But this is something that'll live on long past me. When I focus on that, then I no longer care about whether I posted it on a Monday or I'd be more likely to want to post it on a Monday because it's something that actually excites me. And I started to think, again, like I mentioned, where else is this showing up? Well, this shows up with my kids. There's times when I'm fully present as a father and I recognize that I love my kids. I enjoy my kids and I always love my kids, but there is so many times where I'm like, today, as an example, I committed to taking my kids to school today, and I'm helping my wife, and the thought crossed my mind, shit, I gotta take my kids to school. And immediately it becomes, I become a slave to that idea that I have to take my kids to school versus why do I want to take my kids to school? I chose to tell my wife I wanted to create some space for her. And ultimately, I know that creates connection for us. She's a better mom. I'm a better husband. We're a better unit. And again, it's so easy to lose sight of all these different things throughout all areas of my life. My body. I've been in a space where the last few weeks I've put a lot on my plate, shooting after new targets, and the idea of waking up in the morning had become difficult after so many reps that I had last year of boxing. You've heard my journey where I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning. How does something that was so routine all of a sudden become difficult to do? Well, again, I started to become a slave to what I said I wanted to do, and I lost sight of that. My budget with my wife, I talked about the challenges and the stories of finances and how this is something that I have many stories around, and feeling like I'm lacking as a producer. It was the first thing that came up to me when we started diving into this conversation of finances. Again, that's because I'm looking at it from a perspective of I'm a slave to the budget or the budget process. Versus recently, we leaned into a session that we had this week, and I shifted my mindset. My mindset became is, how do I create freedom with this budget? How do we find ways to create more of what we want? And again, I'm not saying that it's easy, and it's something that happens to me all the time, but I'm slowly recognizing, and this is something that is powerful in every area of your life, that when you focus on what you want, that is ultimately what's going to set you free from what you need. And what I mean by that is if you consider that your life, of the wants and needs is a pyramid. At the very top of the pyramid is the things that you want. The things that excite you, that fire you up. So for instance, with this podcast, it's knowing that I'm creating something that's going to guide my children is something that's powerful to me. That's something that I truly want. Now, on the bottom of that pyramid is the necessity. Well, I made a commitment to post every Monday, and I need to do this. If you think about that, why do I need to do that? I only need to do that because I created the story, and I've created this pressure on myself that I need to post every Monday for whatever the reason is. Now, this podcast is not for me a marketing, opportunity. Like, I'm not getting paid for this. This is something I do out of passion from my heart. Might I have an audience someday that I can monetize this? Awesome. That would be great if it is, but that's not the intention nor the place that I'm at. So when I focus on what I want, which is to create lessons for my children and to guide my children and to gain power for myself and to lock in these messages that I'm learning throughout my life, then by default, I also take care of what I need, which is to post more of these podcasts. So from this, I want you to identify, your assignment from this, if you choose to take it and apply this lesson, because I'm doing it and looking at all the different areas in my life, is to identify 3 places in your life where you are currently being a slave to something that you created. And identify what you actually want for each of these areas that would set you free from slavery. Now, that might sound harsh, but the term slavery is powerful because it gives you an image that we all understand, but you are creating the slavery and you also create the liberty just by shifting the story in your mind. And that place that you identify might just be understanding that, what you are currently thinking and how you're currently operating just needs to shift back to what you previously wanted, and it'll set you free. Or maybe something you're currently doing is really not serving you, and you need to start doing something different in any aspect of your life. So identify 3 places in your life where you are currently being a slave or a victim to something you created, and then identify what you actually want for each of those areas that would set you free. As always, thank you for tuning in to the Honest Liar Podcast, a conversation around finding the inner liar within all of us and leveraging the truth to create expansion across all areas of your life. If you found value in today's podcast, please share, rate, and review the show as it helps with spreading light, which is my mission. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.